The ship of Theseus. Imagine you have a ship, the most famous ship in the world, the ship of the great hero Theseus. Over time, the wooden planks begin to rot, so you replace one, then another, until eventually every single part of the original ship has been replaced with something new. Here's the question. Is it still the same ship? Most people say yes. It looks the same. It functions the same. It has the same name, same history, same identity. But then someone takes all the original rotted planks and builds a second ship from them. Now which one is the real ship of Theseus? The one that kept going? Or the one made from the original material? This is not just about ships. This is about you. Every cell in your human body replaces itself over time. Your bones replace themselves every 10 years, your skin every few weeks. The atoms that made you as a child are almost entirely gone now. So are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Same name, same memories, but almost entirely different matter. And if your thoughts, your personality, and your beliefs have also completely changed since then, what exactly is it that makes you you? The Sorites Paradox. Imagine a heap of sand, a big pile sitting right in front of you. Nobody would argue with you calling it a heap. Now remove one grain. Still a heap, obviously. One grain makes no difference. Now remove another grain. Still a heap. Keep going. One grain at a time. At each step, removing one single grain from the pile. And at each step, the pile is still clearly a heap. But at some point, you end up with 2 grains of sand. Is that a heap? What about 1 grain? And here's the problem. If 1 grain never makes a difference, then you should never reach a point where the heap disappears. But clearly at some point it does. 2 grains is not a heap. 1 grain is definitely not a heap. So at exactly which grain did it stop being a heap? Nobody can answer this, not because they have not thought about it hard enough, but because the question exposes something genuinely broken in how language and categories work. This is the Sorites Paradox, named from the Greek word soros, meaning heap. It was first proposed by the philosopher Eubulides of Miletus over 2,000 years ago, and it has never been solved. Because it is not really about sand, it is about every category human language uses. At what point does a bald man become not bald? At what point does a tall person become not tall? At what point does a rich person become not rich? The categories we use feel clean and clear, but the boundaries between them are nowhere to be found. The Grandfather Paradox. Imagine you build a time machine. You travel back to 1920, and you accidentally prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. They never fall in love. They never marry. They never have children, which means your parent was never born, which means you were never born, which means the person who traveled back in time and prevented your grandfather from meeting your grandmother never existed. But if you never existed, you could not have traveled back in time, which means you could not have prevented your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, which means your grandparents do meet, which means your parent is born, which means you are born, which means you travel back in time, which means you prevent them from meeting, which means you are never born. And the loop begins again. This is the Grandfather Paradox, the most famous problem in all of time travel, a closed logical loop with no possible resolution. There are 3 possible escapes. The first is the fixed timeline. You cannot actually change the past. Whatever you do when you travel back has always been part of the timeline. If you try to prevent your grandparents from meeting something, will always stop you. The second is parallel universes. When you travel back and change something, you create a branching alternate timeline. Your grandparents never meet in that branch, but the original timeline still exists. You still exist in it. The third is the simplest. Time travel to the past is simply impossible. The paradox cannot occur because you can never go back in the first place. The Bootstrap Paradox. Imagine you are a huge Beatles fan. You travel back in time to 1960s Liverpool to watch them perform live. While you are there, you meet a young John Lennon before the Beatles became famous. He asks you what kind of music he should write. You are such a big fan that you remember all the lyrics perfectly. So you write down the words to every Beatles song and hand them to him. He goes on to write those exact songs. The Beatles become the most famous band in history. You grow up listening to them. You become such a huge fan that you travel back in time to watch them perform. Now here is the question. Who actually wrote those songs? You say John Lennon wrote them, but John Lennon got the lyrics from you, and you got them from John Lennon. The songs exist. They have always existed in this timeline, but they were never actually created by anyone. This is the Bootstrap Paradox. When an object or piece of information travels back in time and becomes the cause of itself, it exists in an endless loop with no origin point. Nobody created it. It simply is. It is called the Bootstrap Paradox because of the phrase pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, which is physically impossible. You cannot lift yourself using only your own arms. But in time travel, the information does exactly that. It creates itself. The paradox raises a question that has no clean answer. Can something exist without ever having been created? And if it can, where did it actually come from? Zeno's Paradox. Imagine you are standing 10 meters away from a wall. You decide to walk toward it. Simple enough. But before you can reach the wall, you must first reach the halfway point. 5 meters. Fine, you get there. But before you can reach the wall from 5 meters, you must first reach the halfway point again. 2.5 meters. And before you can reach that point, you must first reach its halfway point. 1.25 meters. And before that, it's halfway. And before that, it's halfway. And before that, it's halfway. Every single distance, no matter how small, can always be divided in half first, which means before you can complete any distance, you must always complete an infinite number of smaller distances first. And completing an infinite number of tasks should be impossible. You cannot finish something that has no end. So mathematically, you should never reach the wall, ever. But you do. You walk across the room every single day. Motion is obviously real, and yet the logic is airtight. This is Zeno's paradox. Proposed by the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea around 450 BC, he used it to argue that motion itself is an illusion, that the world of change and movement we experience is fundamentally unreal. For 2,000 years, nobody could explain what was wrong with the logic. Then calculus arrived. Mathematicians discovered that an infinite series of numbers can actually add up to a finite sum. Half plus a quarter, plus an eighth, plus a 16th, and so on forever actually equals 1. In Infinity can be completed. The math was solved, but philosophers still argue about whether the mathematical solution actually explains what is physically happening or just describes it. The Newcomb Paradox. Imagine there is a being, call it the predictor. It has a perfect track record of predicting human choices. Not almost perfect, perfect. Every single person it has ever tested it has predicted correctly. The predictor places two boxes in front of you. Box A is transparent, you can see inside it. It contains $1,000. Box B is opaque, you cannot see inside it. It contains either $1 million or nothing. Here are the rules. You can take both boxes, or you can take only box B. Here is the catch. The predictor already made its prediction before you walked into the room. If it predicted you would take both boxes, it put nothing in box B. If it predicted you would take only box B, it put $1 million inside. The predictor has never been wrong. So what do? One side of the argument says, take only box B. The predictor is always right. If you are the kind of person who takes both boxes, it already knew that, and box B is empty. If you take only box B, it already knew that too, and box B has $1 million inside. Trust the predictor. The other side says take both boxes. The predictor already made its decision before you walked in. The money is already there or it is not. Nothing you do now changes what is already inside the box. So you might as well take both and get the extra 1,000. Both arguments are completely logical. Both cannot be right. The Omnipotence Paradox. Imagine the most powerful being that could ever exist. A being with no limits, no boundaries, no constraints of any kind. A being that can do literally anything. Now ask it one question. Can you create a rock so heavy that even you cannot lift it? If it says yes, then it creates the rock. And now there is something it cannot do. It cannot lift the rock. So it is not truly omnipotent. If it says no, then there is already something it cannot do. It cannot create that rock. So it is not truly omnipotent. There is no third option. Every possible answer destroys the very thing the being is supposed to be. This is the Omnipotence Paradox. One of the oldest and most discussed problems in the philosophy of religion. Because omnipotence, the idea of unlimited power, appears to be logically self-contradictory. The paradox was discussed by medieval philosophers, including Thomas Aquinas. His response was that omnipotence does not mean the ability to do logically impossible things. A square circle is not a thing. It is a contradiction. And asking God to make one is not a real question about power. It is a question about nothing. But critics say this simply redefines omnipotence to mean something less than unlimited. If there are things an omnipotent being cannot do, then the word omnipotent has lost its meaning. The paradox extends further. Can an omnipotent being create another omnipotent being? If yes, then there are now two omnipotent beings, and neither can truly be unlimited. If no, then there is something it cannot do. Can it make a rule it cannot break? Can it make itself cease to exist? Can it create something genuinely beyond its control? Every question reveals the same crack. Unlimited power appears to be a concept that cannot hold its own weight. The Fermi Paradox. Imagine sitting outside on a clear night looking up at the sky, billions of stars visible above you, and around many of those stars planets, and on some of those planets the conditions for life. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. It contains 2 trillion galaxies. Our galaxy alone has between 100 and 400 billion stars. Scientists estimate there are more stars in the observable universe than grains of sand on every beach on Earth. Given those numbers, the probability of intelligent life existing somewhere other than Earth seems not just likely but mathematically certain. So in 1950, the physicist Enrico Fermi sat down at lunch with colleagues and asked one simple question. Where is everybody? If intelligent life is so statistically inevitable, why have we never detected a single signal, never found a single piece of evidence, never been contacted, never seen anything that suggests we are not completely alone? This gap between the mathematical certainty of alien life and the absolute silence of the universe is the Fermi Paradox, and nobody has solved it. The proposed explanations fall into 2 categories. Either life is far rarer than we think, or intelligent civilizations exist but we cannot detect them. The rare Earth hypothesis says the conditions that produced life on Earth are so specific and so unlikely that we might genuinely be the only ones. The Great Filter Theory says something destroys almost every civilization before it can become detectable. Either we already passed through it, or it is still ahead of us. The Dark Forest Theory says every civilization is hiding, because revealing your location means being destroyed. And the simplest explanation, we have only been broadcasting signals for about 100 years. In cosmic terms, we have been making noise for less than a blink. Brain in a vat? Imagine waking up tomorrow exactly like today. Same room, same sounds, same everything. Now imagine none of it is real. Not metaphorically, literally. Your brain has been removed from your body, placed in a vat of nutrients, and connected to a supercomputer generating a perfect simulation of everything you have ever experienced. Every memory, every person, every sensation, all of it fake, and you would have absolutely no way of knowing. This is the brain in a vat thought experiment, first articulated by philosopher Hilary Putnam in 1981. And it asks one question that has no clean answer. How do you actually know the world around you is real? Your entire experience of reality comes through your brain. Every sight, sound, smell, and touch is just electrical signals being interpreted by tissue inside your skull. You have never experienced the world directly, only your brain's version of it. So if something else was generating those signals instead of the actual world, what would be different for you? Nothing. Descartes wrestled with this in 1641. He called it the evil demon, an all-powerful being feeding him a false reality. His only escape was the one thing that could not be faked, thinking itself. I think therefore I am. The mind exists because it is doing the doubting, but everything it is doubting about could still be an illusion. The Matrix made this idea mainstream in 1999. Philosophers had been losing sleep over it for centuries before that. You cannot step outside your own perception to verify it. Every test you run to check reality uses the very faculties that might themselves be fake. So either the world is real and you are fine, or it is not, and you will never know.